All right. I waited just a minute over to allow those who are running just a little bit late to jump on, but I am going to go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to go over the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Supplemental Letters of Interest that we currently have out for public comment. This is an informational meeting, and today, let me introduce myself first. My name is Mariana Peavy. I am the Grants and Loans Bureau Chief. And then later on, you'll be hearing from Nicholas Hebert. He's the Grant and Loans Senior Engineer for our program. Now, we do have the meeting being recorded. The slides will be made available. We did add it to the link, but we did update the slides a little bit. So we will send it out to all those who have registered to make sure you have the most updated slides. All the participants are currently muted. We do ask that if you have any questions, you put it in the chat box, and we'll make sure to answer them at the end. But we will also unmute everyone, allow people to raise their hands and answer or ask some questions of Nicholas and I. And then once this is completed, again, we'll send everything out and we will post the recording for your reference later. Now, as I mentioned before, this is just an informational meeting. We do have the letters of interest out for public comment. This presentation is to really go over a little background information to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and how we're looking to implement it and how we set up the letters of interest so people can access this funding. Now, you do have an opportunity to submit public comments. We will take those into consideration before we finalize the letters of interest and put them out for people to submit for our state fiscal year 2024 priority list. Now, today, again, we'll give you some background to Bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and how that funding works, how we are anticipating using it, and how we set up the supplemental letters of interest. And then lastly, questions will be accepted. Now, to give you a little bit of information of the funding we're going to be looking at today, is we're looking at the sewer overflow and stormwater grant. This was a grant program that was passed in law in 2018, and then EPA set it up to allow states to have access to funding for a sewer overflow and stormwater grant. This funding, again, could be paired with the SRF funding or act as a standalone grant. We haven't had the capacity to be able to bring it on, but with all this additional funding, we're kind of bringing it in the loop and implementing it this year, along with these other funding sources that we got from the 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which I'll reference to as Bill for the remaining of the presentation. Now, Bill, we received actually 5 different new funding from Bill. This is funding that has been appropriated for the next 5 years. So we'll get these grants annually for the next 5 years. 2 of those funding sources were supplemental to the current SRF programs that we have. So it was a supplemental grant on top of our base grant to the drinking water SRF, and another one on top of the clean water SRF. Now, these other sources, the 3 other that came with Bill, is what we're trying to implement right now. And So we developed letters of interest this year to try to utilize those new sources, and we'll kind of show you a little bit more about this additional funding. Now, the first of the three that we haven't taken yet with Bill was the clean water emerging contaminants. Now, what we got allocated for the first year of it was $462,000. All of this is what we would consider principal forgiveness, so it's essentially like 100% grant. And this will be going to wastewater system addressing emerging contaminants. Then we have the drinking water emerging contaminants. Now, we are getting a little bit more money there. We're getting $7.5 million this next year. Again, all of this is grant dollars. Now, one thing that we do have to do is specify at least 25% of these funds to disadvantaged communities and those serving less than 25,000 in population. The next one is drinking water lead service line replacement funding. This is a larger pool of money. This is $28 million that we're receiving, and it is loan money. This is not grant money like you see with the emerging contaminant grants. This is loan funding, so we're getting it. It acts similar to the SRF, but we have to specifically put it to lead service line replacements. Now, with this money, we do have to essentially give out 49% of it in principal forgiveness to disadvantaged communities. Now, the next funding program we have is that sewer overflow and stormwater planning grant. This next year, we're estimating we're getting around $337,000. We're not exactly sure on that because we did, there's some previous funding we didn't tap into, and we might be able to tap into previous years that we haven't brought in yet. So we're not quite sure how that's going to land yet. We're still waiting on EPA. Now, with this funding, the system will need to match this funding with 20%, and then the rest of it will be grant dollars from this source. Now, let me go into each of these individually. Again, the emerging contaminants, it's 100% grant, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it out for our state fiscal year 2024, and we are going to put it to a wide variety of projects as long as you can show that it's addressing emerging contaminants. So these are contaminants that are within the water quality criteria, and let me go back, that are not regulated by water quality criteria. And I want to specify that on the clean water side, there are maybe some contaminants that are regulated on the drinking water side, but not regulated on the wastewater side. So if it is not regulated on the wastewater side, it is eligible for funding if your wastewater system is looking to treat those. Now, if it is addressed in the water quality criteria, that is not eligible. And on the drinking water side, same thing. Again, we just have a little bit more money here of $7.5 million annually for the next 5 years to address emerging contaminants. The next item is the lead service line replacement and lead service line inventories. Now, with this, we are going to be allocated $28 million. Now, when we get this money, we do have to have the projects in order to accept this grant. We're not quite sure if systems are ready or are aware of lead service lines that need to be replaced, and whether systems are ready to take out loans for this. But we are going to go ahead and put out letters of interest, see what interest we have out for that. We are also trying to find out the communities that want to do inventories. So lead service line inventories. We may be funding it from this grant, depending on how many loans we do, but we are looking at other sources to fund inventories as well. So either if you have lead service lines you need to replace, or if you want to do an inventory, we definitely suggest that you apply for this funding. Now, again, you can put it in conjunction with the drinking water SRF project that you're already doing, or you can do a standalone project. Next is the sewer overflow and stormwater planning grant. Now, these are planning grants with a 20% match requirement. Now, DEQ is going to limit this to $50,000 per system. But what you are able to use this for is either you can use this for a stormwater plan, or you could use this funding to fund inflow and infiltration studies. And so if you're getting a regular planning grant from us, or if you are doing a construction loan, this might be a good way for you to tap into some money to double check, your I&I situation, and we can help fund that. And definitely in the future, or depending on demand and depending on how much money that EPA grants us through this, we may allow for some construction projects. But right now we're trying to focus it into stormwater planning efforts or I&I work. Now, what we're doing here is in our regular either SRF LOIs or our planning grant LOIs, we do have a couple questions in there. They're prompt questions, kind of saying, are you doing any work that maybe deals with emerging contaminants or lead? If we do receive those LOIs, we definitely will try to notify the systems of this supplemental funding. But in general, please note this, if you do answer yes to some of these trigger questions, this supplemental funding is probably something you need to be applying for as well, so you can get this additional money. The supplemental LOIs can, again, be paired up with the clean water or drinking water SRF projects, and in some cases with the OSG with the wastewater planning grants. Applicants, again, submitting an LOI form, they can, we are looking at those that can be paired with a current SRF project or grant. Those who are getting funding there will be prioritized in our rating process with the supplemental funding. But please know, standalone projects will be rated and also have opportunities to get their project funded as well. These are new grant programs. We're not quite sure the demand of this funding, so definitely suggest to apply if you think there's a possibility you could use this funding. Now, we will have separate priority list for each of these different funding. Now, when it comes to the emerging contaminants and the lead service line, those will be incorporated in the intended use plans that we put out annually. So it may be an attachment, or there will be a list incorporated in those intended use plans. Now, for the OSG grant, a separate priority list will be established for that funding. So it will be similar to how we have separate priority lists for the wastewater planning grants and for the drinking water planning grants. And like I mentioned before, we have trigger questions within the existing letters of interest. And so this just shows you here, you see down on number 6 and 7. This is on the drinking water loan letter of interest. And we do ask if your project in part or in whole is going to be addressing emerging contaminants, and if you mark yes, and if we've already received your letters of interest, once these supplemental LOIs are available, we'll definitely send them out to you, but it's also a good indication that you should be submitting a supplemental LOI along with number 7 with addressing lead service line replacements. And oh yeah, we have little pop-ups here. Now, for the timeline for these supplemental letters of interest, we are going to keep it the same as our regular letters of interest. So we have put out the supplemental LOIs out for public comment, which will end on November 30th. We'll address those public comments, reevaluate the supplemental LOIs internally, and then we are looking that, the first week, hopefully by December, that we will post the final supplemental letters of interest. Now, the supplemental letters of interest will be due the same time as the existing letters of interest, and so they'll be due January 13th, 2023. Now, the reason why we're kind of keeping the same is, first of all, you guys already kind of know the process of when the supplemental letters of interest are due, or excuse me, letters of interest are due. But what we're looking at is internal, we have to rate those all at the same time. Definitely with staffing, timeline, the creation of the intended use plan, all has to happen at the same time. And so that is why we're having these letters of interest due the same time as our regular letters of interest. But we will rate those in January, February timeframe, and then we'll put it out, the priority list out for public comment in April and May. Now, the one that we will not be putting out for public comment is the OSG priority list. We may post it for information, but with that one, we actually have a different vetting process with EPA. So we actually have to put a plan together to EPA, which EPA approves. That one does not go out for public comment and approval. Now, the rest of the funding, though, will go out for public comment. We will finalize it. We will ask our board to approve it. And then in the June, July timeframe, we will notify everyone of whether funding is available for their system, and then they can start tapping into that money July 1st once we've set up the applications for that funding. So very similar to our regular planning grant process and our loan process. Now I will pass it off to Nicholas to present on the letters of interest forms.
All right, thank you, Mariana. We'll get things set up here for me to take over control. So we are going to take a little deeper dive into the actual 4 supplemental LOI forms that Mariana outlined. Let's see, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here, Mariana. I'm controlling. Maybe we can do it the old-fashioned way here.
Okay.
Next slide, please. All right, very good. So first, the first supplemental form, again, this should all look very familiar if you've ever filled out one of our existing drinking water or wastewater LOI forms. It has the same feel, the same look. The first one here you can see is the emerging contaminant for the clean water projects. Again, these are projects that kind of have an emphasis on the PFAS issues that we are currently seeing. But really, any emerging contaminant that's not regulated under the Clean Water Act or through a discharge permit is fair game. These are emerging contaminants that have been, emerging for a long time. They're still emerging contaminants, I guess you could say. Those are fair game. So that's the first one. And then the second one is, we'll hit the next slide here. It looks very similar, is the drinking water emerging contaminants. And this, again, as Mariana mentioned, this really does, especially the drinking water, really has a strong emphasis on the PFAS issues, contaminants. And so this is something that again, there's a little bit more money on the drinking water side, and we're hopeful that folks with PFAS issues will be able to benefit from this. Next one is the lead service line replacement for drinking water. Again, as Mariana mentioned, a large pot of money. We're not sure how this is going to play out in the years to come, but we're going to throw it out there to systems to see what kind of demand there is for lead service line inventories or for potentially lead service line replacement, which would be great if we could get those going and be able to utilize some of this funding. And then the last one is the sewer overflow and stormwater planning grant. Again, this is separate. It's its own little pot of money, and we're really anticipating that it would be paired nicely with the existing wastewater planning grants in the form of an I&I evaluation. Could be standalone, as Mariana mentioned, or also potentially some stormwater master planning, facility planning as well. And it's that 20% system match comes with this, and a max DEQ amount of $50,000. And so this is what the forms look like. The 4 supplemental LOIs, again, should look pretty familiar if you've ever filled out our existing LOIs. And at the end of the presentation, we'll provide a link to where you can find these. And I believe also the link has been provided in the chat box as well. So we're going to dive a little bit into the details on how to fill these out. The first section 1, project information. Again, this should all look very familiar to you. It starts to look a little bit different here. We're asking for, kind of some system contact information, system name, address, which gets us to the next the question here, which is really kind of important. And that has to do with what Mariana was alluding to as being standalone or supplemental to an existing LOI. And so, for example, with this LOI, the question prompts you if you intend to submit a 2024 drinking water letter of interest form, let us know yes, no, because if you answer yes, we want you to move on to section 2. If you answer no, we want you to fill out all of section 1, which is all the background information and the facility information. But again, we don't want you to repeat information. There's no need to fill out these forms twice with the same information. So if you answer no, though, that'll take us to the next slide. We really do need all the system information from you, and so that we would ask you to fill out in section A, system information. In section B, we would ask you to fill out kind of a project readiness, which includes a project description and kind of what you're doing. And then in section C, That would be the affordability section. And so that helps us ascertain if the system is qualifies for disadvantaged status. And so again, all of these are between the sections, these are very similar between the 4 LOIs. Section A, B, and C are very, very similar. There's some small differences between the 4 supplemental LOIs. But again, if you're planning on doing a standalone supplemental LOI, so if it's a standalone lead project or if it's a standalone emerging contaminant project, you'll have to fill out this information. However, if once you filled this information out, or if you're planning on attaching it to your wastewater or drinking water LOI, you can skip straight to section 2, which is the next slide. And that will, that's the integrated priority rating system. And so that's where we kind of ask you those questions, the assign points that help us kind of prioritize where the systems where this funding goes to. And so, for example, here you see the emerging contaminants for the clean water side, and we'll kind of dive into the questions here a little bit to kind of help get a feel for how to answer these. And again, these questions are not rocket science. A lot of these questions are similar to the existing LOIs. We're trying to kind of understand your project and the issues that you're encountering with this specific system. So the first question number 1 under project description, should be really kind of a give me question. If you're filling this supplemental LOI out, basically asks if the project is going to reduce or eliminate emerging contaminants from surface water or groundwater. Again, if you're filling this out, we anticipate that you probably will answer yes to this question. I hopefully anyway, and provide us with a short description of what you're planning, what emerging contaminant you're planning to reduce or eliminate. The next question really gets a little bit more specific to the actual contaminant that you're planning to reduce or eliminate. And so we have a few listed there, you know, the PFAS, the pharmaceuticals, the EDCs, or other. This is your opportunity to describe what exactly you're going to be, what exactly emerging contaminant you're going to be removing or reducing. The third question really kind of, I think, is weighted heavily for us because it's important that you know what you're treating. And that is, you know, have you actually conducted water quality testing to determine the level of contaminant in question? So you potentially get 20 points here, more points than question 1 and 2. But this is really, we felt this was really important, that we need to not only does DEQ, but the system also needs to understand what emerging contaminant you're targeting. And then the last question here really has to do with the disadvantaged status of the system. So small disadvantaged systems are incentivized or prioritized with an additional 10 points. So you add up all the points here for the clean water, and you could potentially get up to 60 points if you were a standalone system. And then obviously if you're pairing this with a clean water existing LOI, those existing LOI points would be additive to the 60 points. And so that's kind of what we're looking at for the emerging contaminants. The next one is we'll move on to the drinking water emerging contaminants. Again, it looks very similar in section 2. We have a series of questions we'll ask. In question 1, you can see that we do heavily prioritize the PFAS. That's something that's kind of written into the bill funding package, that this drinking water emerging contaminant funding really be pointed or really be utilized to address PFAS. And so we're prioritizing that with a 25 points. Moving down to question number 2, you know, we're talking about cyanotoxins. And so again, it's an issue that we've seen in our state, prioritizing projects that might potentially address cyanotoxins. And then question number 3, we just kind of open it up. Obviously, it's weighted a lot less, only with 5 points. But we're asking, you know, if there's other contaminants other than PFAS or cyanotoxins, please let us know what you're planning on doing. With all 3 of those questions, we do ask that you provide documentation for sampling results. And so if you don't have sampling results, how do you know that you have an issue with these is kind of the thought behind that. So make sure that if you don't have sample results and you're planning to or wanting to utilize this funding, might be a good time to get those samples taken. Question number 4, it really relates to all three, first 3 questions. If you've answered yes to 1 through 3, you should be able to answer yes to question number 4, which is, does it have an EPA health advisory? And it might be that it doesn't, but we're trying to prioritize those that do. Question number 5 really was crafted to try to prioritize systems that are between a rock and a hard place, specifically with PFAS, in maybe to some degree with cyanotoxins. But the question is if your production sources are impacted by these emerging contaminants, it's such that you're unable to meet max day demands with these sources offline. And so in other words, if a system only has 2 sources and their largest source is impacted such that they can't utilize it because of one of these emerging contaminants, that would be a situation where you would get these 10 points. If a system has 10 sources and the source impacted by the emerging contaminant is its smallest source and it really can afford to take it offline and rely on its other sources, then we wouldn't answer yes to this and wouldn't provide points for this question. And then last but not least, or maybe least, question number 6 gets back to that disadvantaged status for the system. So you add up the points, again, potentially up to 75 points for the drinking water contaminants, depending on what you're looking at doing. So that takes us to the next one, being the lead service line replacement or lead service line inventories. The first question really is pointed towards these lead service line inventories. Question 1A really is intended to capture folks that are maybe ahead of the curve and have already done a lead service line inventory. Chances are probably not many systems have done that at all, if any. And so question number 1B is really intended to capture folks who are ramping up and ready to do these lead service line inventories. And again, this funding might be used to do a lead service line inventory. So this might be one question that you would mark as yes, and you'd also intend to use this funding to do that lead service line inventory. Question number 2 is again a relatively straightforward question. It's whether or not the system has exceeded any kind of lead action level within the last 5 years. Again, this is intended to prioritize systems that have a problem with lead currently. They have a known problem with lead, and we want to incentivize this money to those systems. Question number 3 is very similar in the sense that if the system's completed corrosion control study or installed corrosion control measures in response to lead action levels, then there's a lead issue in the system. There's a known lead issue in the system, and we want to incentivize those systems as well. Question number 4, again, we're not sure what kind of inventories are out there right now, but it really has to get to really is trying to incentivize systems that have a known documented problem with lead service lines within the distribution system, and that those lead service lines are going to be replaced as part of the project. And again, we don't know if there's going to be a lot of systems that are ready for this, but it's certainly worth asking the question and incentivizing those systems that are ready to move towards construction with this money. And then lastly, again, as Mariana mentioned, there is some potential principal forgiveness or loan forgiveness for disadvantaged systems that qualify as disadvantaged, and so we want to make sure that we incentivize those systems as well in this process. And so that's question number 5. So again, you add up the points and you can get potentially 65 points for the lead service line replacement supplemental LOI. All right, so that takes us to the last one, the OSG, Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Grant, Planning Grant. Again, the first question here, it should be pretty much a give me 10 points for somebody filling this out, basically asking if this planning effort is intended to reduce or eliminate I&I from entering wastewater or stormwater collection systems. We're assuming that most people filling this out will get at least 10 points. That's the hope anyway. The second question really targets systems that have some sort of NPDES or IPDES stormwater or wastewater permit that requires this type of planning effort. So that it might be some kind of triggered compliance schedule or compliance item to complete an I&I evaluation or to complete a stormwater master plan or do some sort of evaluation. And if you answer yes to that, we want to incentivize people, systems that are being required to do these studies. The third one is asking, really trying to incentivize developing a little bit more sophisticated computerized hydraulic model of the wastewater stormwater collection system and making sure it's calibrated with flow monitoring data. Again, we envision that this would be paired very nicely with, say, like a wastewater facility plan, which is something that's, this is something that's typically done anyway. And so this would be a way to provide a little bit more resources to those types of efforts. Similarly to question number 4, it asks if this planning effort will utilize smoke testing or camera inspection to identify issues within the collection system. Again, this is something that pairs very nicely with a wastewater planning grant, and also, with stormwater planning could be very useful as well. Question number 5 kind of gets into the details of how bad is bad. We have 4 questions there regarding how bad the I&I is. The question 5A is really based on how high the flows are during dry weather and wet weather flows. Documentation, 5B, documentation of collection system surcharging. 5C, documentation of overflows. And then 5D being documentation of continuous operation of pump station during wet weather flow conditions. And so kind of a quick litmus test of the collection system and how severe the I&I is. Question number 6 is really more specific to stormwater. So we have an actual stormwater LOI question, which is new for us. And that's whether or not the planning effort will evaluate stormwater treatment alternatives or best management practices for treatment of stormwater, with potential 10 points there. And then lastly, we also have the disadvantaged system information there, whether or not the system is disadvantaged or not. So you add up the points, you could potentially receive up to 80 points if it's as a standalone, or as well, you could add it. You would add the wastewater planning grant to that if you were doing a supplemental. All right, so that gets us kind of through some of the details specific to each one of these LOIs. The next step for all of the LOIs is kind of the section 3, which is the authorized submitter. Again, this should look very familiar for anyone who's submitted our drinking water or wastewater LOIs before. And so we need a signature and a date, and kind of to draw your attention for the next slide. This is where we would prompt you in this little box to attach it if applicable. If you're not doing a standalone, we want you to include it with your existing letter of interest, whether it's drinking water or wastewater letter of interest. And then there's the deadline that Mariana mentioned of January 13th, 2023. So that's really pretty simple, pretty short. There's 4 of them, but they should be pretty easy, hopefully, to fill out, which kind of brings us to the end here. There's some additional resources here for you for EPA. You can see the supplemental LOI forms are available online. And also, if you do have specific public comments, please submit those online. We can answer questions from an informational standpoint, clarify anything we said. But if you have a specific public comment, that does need to be submitted through the website here, and then we can incorporate that public comment in the final LOIs. Again, would love to ask some questions, but we can't provide specific feedback unless you submit a public comment. So with that, I'm going to let Bonnie facilitate some of the questions received in the chat, and then once we've done that, we'll open it up for folks to unmute themselves. So take it away, Bonnie.
All right. Thanks, Nicholas. So we have received a few questions in the chat, and as Nicholas said, Please feel free to continue submitting them in the chat, and then after we address all of those questions, we will have the opportunity to unmute. So the first question is to review a question on reviewing the terms of the lead financing. So I think that might be Mary Anna.
Could you restate the question?
It's just what are the terms of
the
lead
terms.
financing? Yeah.
That is something I didn't go over. So what I'm looking to do, it's not finalized yet. I do need to, once this goes through the process, and we usually do, as you know, for SRF program, we double check rates annually right before we put out the intended use plan. I will do that same process. One thing that I am proposing or looking into doing is making the rates for the lead service line replacement money different than our regular SRF program. Now, I'm expecting rates to go up a little bit for the SRF program this next year, but I am going to keep the lead service line money rates as low as possible. So I believe in statute, usually for on the drinking water side, a non-disadvantaged community, we can do up to 20 years. So as for term, it'll be that long. And then I'm looking to see if I could bring down the rate to maybe 0.5%. If I can go lower than that, I will. And then for disadvantaged communities, I can go out to 30 years. And again, I'm going to try, I believe in our statute, we have to add 0.25% to whatever that 20-year rate is. So say if that's 0.5%, then we'll be at 3/4 of an interest rate for the lead service line money. So I am trying to make this as attractive as possible because it's $28 million. We definitely want to get this out. This is definitely we want to have this one-time money over the next 5 years anyways, replace these lead service lines and really take care of, you know, Idaho's issues. So in that point, that's kind of where I'm at with rates. Not finalized yet. Obviously, we don't have those rates set, but as for terms, that's what we're looking at least initially for the first year to get this program going.
Okay, so the next question is, what would be the advantages for a community to pursue financing for study, design, and replacement?
Would this be for their stormwater?
Let's see, that is Christina's question. I'm not sure if it's for the lead inventory or for the I&I study. Christina, maybe you could clarify.
Yeah. Hi, Bonnie. Hi, Mariana.
Hi.
Nicholas. So no, that's just a secondary question on the lead financing. So just kind of a follow-up to that. So if a community is not disadvantaged and would have to obviously take out a loan, I've got 3 questions that are related all to the lead financing, particularly for those non-disadvantaged communities. So I'm just asking, so what would be the advantages for a community to pursue financing for either a lead study, right, the inventory design, or the actual replacement? I mean, obviously, we all understand the health benefits and the public health and safety, but do you have some thoughts on that? Thank you.
You know, it's a good question. I think really it's based on the community. I guess where I'm looking at it as a community as a whole, if we do know that several of the homes have lead service lines, an individual homeowner may have some difficulties getting out a loan and replacing this. Let's say it's a non-disadvantaged community. They're probably not going to be able to as, you know, find a loan to spread this out for 30 years or 20 years. The other aspect is getting interest rates right now down, you know, to 0.5%. So it's definitely, there's some cost savings there. And I think it's, I think collectively for the community, if there's educations and to the community, and really a big concern for everyone to collectively address their lead service lines, this is an option. I think there's some states that have regulation on it. We definitely, you know, in Idaho, we don't know where we're at there, but we do have this one-time funding right now to address it. I think lead's a big talking point. Now, one thing there too is, you know, that is something the city's also, or a community is going to have to look at a system of going, if a private owner does not want their lead service line replaced, you know, essentially you can't touch it. You have to go on to the next. And I know there's definitely some strategy and to trying to implement something like that. I know there's amongst the states, we've had a lot of discussions about the complexity of how they gave us this money to really ensure that it solves the problem. But it was written into law, and so this is how we're putting it out. So yeah, we're unsure, Christine, to be honest, what the demand will be, as I rambled, but we definitely want to give it a shot. We don't want to make assumptions that no one wants this money. So we are definitely going to tap into this grant and service the systems that do want this funding and address this issue.
Perfect. Thank you for all of that information. I appreciate that.
I'm not sure if that covered Christina's debt authority in place part. I think it might have. Okay, so let's move on.
Yeah,
the next,
well, it's, I'll go ahead and pop in with the debt authority. Yeah, since it's a loan, systems will still have to get the debt authority due to, you know, Idaho's statutes on incurring debt. Obviously, there's some associations, obviously, they just need to follow their bylaws, but for cities, definitely. Now, what will be interesting is how we end up applying the principal forgiveness to this. If we do have a large community that says non-disadvantaged, that takes a lot of money, all of a sudden we have to give out 49% of the grant we take out in principal forgiveness. So all of a sudden it may be where a disadvantaged community can almost have 100% of their project taken care of. So it's kind of, it really depends on who all applies in a given fiscal year to see how everything lays out with the principal forgiveness and us meeting the grant requirements.
Perfect, thank you.
So the next couple questions are about the OSG, the Sewer and Stormwater Grant. So the first question is, does the OSG require engineer involvement, or can an operator or city clerk submit a less sophisticated proposal for the I&I type work for small projects?
It's a great question. I'll jump in here. Yeah, so great question. Honestly, I don't have a great answer. How we envision this to be rolled out is that it would be similar to the planning grants, the existing planning grants that we have. And so the easy answer would be yes, we would require that an engineering analysis be conducted as part of the I&I evaluation. Now there are maybe some gray areas where, you know, maybe a system just wants to do smoke testing, right? Or maybe a system wants to do just camera inspection. You know, maybe there might be some flexibility in there that we might be able to apply this OSG grant for maybe a smaller or very specific non-engineering analysis type of work. So it's kind of a maybe, not a great definitive answer, but I think it's typically speaking, our expectation would be that this would follow the same planning grant process that we have in place, that would require an engineer to do an analysis for a standalone I&I evaluation. However, we want to be flexible to, I think we could be flexible to provide maybe some scenarios, specific case-by-case scenarios where this OSG money would maybe not require a full-blown engineering analysis. Mariana, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, I think you answered it as well as we can till we see kind of what comes through to us.
Okay, so a couple more questions on what the OSG funds can be used for. One of the questions is if the OSG LOI can be utilized as match for a clean water LOI. So the clean water loan LOI.
So if that's a great question. So if a system is taking out a loan and they want to tap into some of that OSG money, definitely the cost that the SRF loan covers can be considered match.
And then another.
If I could step in quickly, sorry, Bonnie.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question pertained more to the grant side.
Oh, on the grant side.
Oh, okay.
So I guess we would have to kind of look at, I think we could. We'd kind of see how we'd have to line up the numbers. So if the facility plan, you're looking at it and I don't know, say it's 100,000, definitely and then we usually cover with the planning grant 50,000 of that. Now, in that total of that 100,000, what we need to see is the itemized cost for that I&I. And so if 10,000 of that 50,000 you're covering is for I&I, then yes, we can still apply that OSG grant to it. Now, if I have some backlash from EPA on that, we'll kind of discuss it, but I don't see why we couldn't somewhat blend those.
Great, thanks.
Okay, another question on OSG being utilized for seepage testing.
I'll maybe take a crack at that. I don't think so. That's I mean, unless a system wanted to get really creative and you know, exercise some creative writing skills, or unless we had a really unique situation where you know, seepage testing was directly related to a sewer overflow. If we could tie it to a sewer overflow, if the lagoons were overflowing every year and they could be related to the lack of seepage testing. However, I can't quite see how that would line up in my mind. And so probably the answer would be no. But again, we're open, you know, as we say, we want to be flexible. We want to be open because of the new funding sources. And, you know, we love to push the boundaries, as Mariana alluded to, and get EPA's feathers all ruffled if we can. So we're very open to creative ideas. However, that would be a little bit of a stretch in my mind, unless there's very site-specific context that would shift it the other way.
Yeah, OSG definitely. I've seen majority of states kind of use this for stormwater management plans, definitely we kind of dug in the weeds a little bit and saw that you could use it for I&I, and so we thought that would was something we kind of definitely saw more impactful in the state.
Right.
But yeah, we'll submit it to EPA, see what they say. But yeah, I think it might be a little more difficult since I was now kind of digging into the weeds of getting supported.
Okay, how does funding of the supplemental LOIs compare with SRF funding of years past in terms of pre-fiscal year 2023?
Okay, so how would it compare? I'm just going to make how does it compare to previous the supplemental funding?
Amy, if you want to jump in, I think it's saying compared to the general SRF funding that the programs received prior to 2023, since we haven't rolled out the supplemental funding before this.
Yeah, what percent of this is of past efforts that you've funded through just the LOIs?
Yeah, we haven't,
because this is new.
Tapped into any of this funding yet.
Right. So how does it compare to the two existing programs that you've had in place?
Well, those ones were just on top of the current SRF program. So for the drinking water SRF, the bill supplemental portion was 17 million to the drinking water SRF. And on the clean water SRF, the surplus or supplemental to the regular clean water SRF was $8 million. Is that what you were wanting to know, Amy?
Yeah, I guess I don't know what the current level of funding is for the existing programs.
Oh, for our existing programs? Okay. Well, usually, so many things are changing. So usually we receive around $11 million a year for drinking water SRF. That's our base grant. Unfortunately, it lowered to $7 million. So that's what we've been getting. So we usually get between $7 and $11 million on the drinking water side annually. Now, this next year, we're going to get that $7 million we usually do, and then $17 million on top. So that's what we're getting for our regular SRF program. And on the clean water side, we usually get, like I said, around $8 million, but it was reduced to $5 million. Congress took money off the top to put towards earmarks. But we'll get $5 million next year, and the supplemental on top of that in our regular SRF program is $8 million. So we'll get nearly $13 million on the clean water side. Then we are tapping into this additional funding. For the bill, it's those 2 emerging contaminants, which we've never had any funding like this before. And so this is really a new program for us. And again, with the lead service line replacements, we haven't had any funding specifically for this before. So, which is, interesting. We're getting $28 million. So we're, getting more than our regular base grant and supplemental funding for the lead service line replacement. And now these programs here, we are going to be getting them for the next 5 years at this funding level.
Okay. The next question is, would the emerging contaminants funding for drinking water systems cover costs for an engineer to create an emergency response plan for surface water systems for potential harmful algal bloom events?
I can take a crack at this. So the way that we have this set up, the way that we have emerging contaminants set up is for construction projects. And so we would have to shift that type of activity to a planning grant, to a planning effort. So the way it's set up, I think the answer would be no. However, I don't know that it's excluded from a federal standpoint, and so it's something that we could certainly look into. And if there was a demand for it, you know, we might have to create a separate, a new LOI or some sort of separate system to be able to fund those systems separate from construction projects. And so I think that's a great question that we'll probably have to think a little bit about. And then if there is demand, we certainly could try to facilitate that. I guess, Mariana, do you have any perspective on that?
You know, I would suggest you put that down as a public comment. So it's something we can definitely go back and look at. Again, yes, we're kind of looking mostly at construction projects, but you know, if we can easily tie it to a planning grant, like that specific amount, or do it standalone, that's something we can look and see if we can, if it would work out with how we have it, the LOIs currently rated. Like, I'd like to look at our letter of interest and go, okay, if someone's coming to us specifically for just this, and maybe a planning grant too, like, or just standalone, could they get enough points? Could they get any points? So they could get on the list. And so definitely submit that as a public comment, and we'll take a look at whether the process can incorporate that type of work.
Okay, that is the end of the questions in the chat. So if anyone would like to just state their question live, they can go ahead and do that now. Just wait a minute and see. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to post the link again to the public comment form, which also is the same webpage with the supplemental draft forms for your review. And you can go ahead and submit a public comment if you would like to until this Wednesday, November 30th. That is our deadline for public comment. And we will be sending out a recording, a copy of this recording, and then an updated slide handout to everyone who registered. So we'll be doing that in the next few days. And I think that is it. So thank you all so much for attending, and we'll look forward to your comment if you have one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.